If we experience something super traumatic, it just buries it into the myofascial system. Our myofascial system is our emotional hard drive. Whenever we experience something traumatic, we hold our breath. The main input to the nervous system is the breath. The number one cause of cavities is mouth breathing. 66% of people breathe with their mouth open while they sleep. When we breathe through our mouth, it signals to our body we're in fight or flight.
Welcome to the Vitalist podcast, where healing meets wonder. This is your space to gain transformative knowledge, deepen your mind-body connection, and awaken your human spirit. If you're ready to connect with your innate potential, embrace life's challenges, and expand what you believe is possible, this is the place. Get ready to slow down, be moved, and live like a true vitalist. Dr. Sachin Patel, welcome to the Vitalist podcast. It's truly an honor to have you here today.
I know it's going to be a fun conversation. Thank you for the opportunity.
Let's get started. You say the future of the doctor is in the patient. I just want to expand. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so this phrase, the doctor of the future, comes from Thomas Edison. And one of the things that he says is that the doctor of the future will interest the patient in themselves. And when we study the actual problem that healthcare is facing, and really humanity is facing right now, I don't think it's going to be more doctors, more nurses, more drugs, more hospitals. That's the actual solution. I think the actual solution is people who are self-actualized, people who actually understand that they've been given this beautiful body, yet nobody's taught them how to drive this vehicle. Nobody's taught them the rules of engagement. Nobody's taught them what buttons to push to get a predictable response in their body. And so most of people's first half of their life is kind of floundering and not really unlocking the magic that they have. So it's kind of like having a car and not knowing what type of fuel to put in it, not knowing what type of oil to put in it. But what I do know is that our bodies, as you and I both know, are absolutely brilliant. They created this amazing vessel, right? Two cells came together and started multiplying and dividing and, created this amazing body that we have. And we are essentially dying and being reborn in every minute. So just like buying you a new car or buying me a new car doesn't make me a better driver, giving people new cells every moment of their life doesn't necessarily make them healthier until we change the environment and the signals that those cells are receiving. And that doesn't happen in the doctor's office, right? As a chiropractor myself, we can modify people's physiology, modulate it, we can adjust them structurally and create improvements there. And that's a very, very powerful intervention that they can't do for themselves, frankly. But what they do when they leave the office is where they spend 99.9% of their time. And so if they don't have clarity on the things that are negatively impacting them, then they're just going to be prone to chronic illnesses and diseases. Myself, I have a 15-year-old son. I don't want him to catch it, develop an illness and then find a holistic practitioner. I'd rather teach him how to be healthy from the very beginning. And so there's nothing more important for us to learn how to take care of than our bodies. And when we do that, it completely changes the trajectory of our lives. Imagine somebody not for the first 40 years not knowing how to take care of themselves versus somebody who did know how to take care of themselves for the first 40 years. Imagine how different their lives would be. Imagine how much closer one would be to their fullest potential. And imagine, the world that would create, right? Happy people, healthy people, people who are inspired and inspiring others, passing down wisdom. That's what our elders used to do. And unfortunately, you could be 60, 70 years old and not know what to eat, not know how to think, not know how to, set up your home to be a sanctuary for your healing. So what are our elders going to pass down to the next generation if they don't possess that capability themselves? So at the end of the day, if we understand the magnitude of our healthcare crisis, it's more healthy people is the only solution. And the only way for us to create more healthy people is for people to become their own doctor, which they already are, whether they want to take on that responsibility or not. They already have that capacity and capability, and we just help them see that and reflect that back to them, and then show them what buttons to push and when to push them so that they can live their best life.
Where did the world shift? Because the word doctor, like the root meaning, doctor, is to teach. Where do you think the misstep was that
made us go backwards and made us forget about this doctor within us?
Yeah, I think some people, depending on what we believe to be true, we could go down the conspiracy rabbit hole, and I don't think it's a conspiracy, but there's powerful people at play here. And I believe it was in the 1900s at some point, Rockefeller medicine came in, took over all the institutions, and wiped out anything that was natural and holistic, and in fact vilified it, including chiropractic, including homeopathy, and essentially, doctored the doctors, indoctrinated the doctors, right, to think a certain way and prescribe petroleum-based chemicals that would make a healthy person sick. How can you ever make a sick person or unwell person healthy if you give them the very chemicals that would make a healthy person, a perfectly healthy person, would get sick taking those things? So we've essentially lowered the ceiling of what that person's vitality is and what their potential vitality is by making them dependent on these medications. And here's one of the truths that I want people to unlock for themselves. And they'll have an aha moment, I hope, during our conversation. But that inner doctor has resided in them their entire lives. It's regulating their breath. It's regulating their heart rate. It's regulating their digestion. It's regulating cell division. It's regulating all their hormones. It's regulating their sleep and wake cycles. Like, all of these things have been automatically taken care of for us for our entire lives. And then at some point we are convinced, for whatever reason, maybe it's all the commercials, maybe we heard somebody say something, maybe we saw our mom or dad go to the doctor and come back with a pill, and that was implanted and impregnated into our subconscious mind, that if something is wrong with me, somebody else is going to fix it with a poison. I don't know where that happened for people. However, one of the things I know is that nothing can fix your body better than it can fix itself. In fact, that's exactly what it's designed to do. And we're even seeing that, right? The latest research is, and the latest, innovations in healthcare are all based on healing ourselves, right? Using our own materials like stem cells to heal ourselves, using our own infrared light to heal ourselves. In fact, there's clothing now that I wear that reflects my own infrared light back into my body. So I can use garments that heal me. And so I think where everything went wrong, even in the natural space, is people have been convinced that somebody else or something else is going to fix them, and the solution is outside of them, instead of inside them. And that's the best place to hide it. The thing with disease that's really interesting is there's no such thing as disease. There's just physiology expressing itself in a way that increases the chances of survival. Cancer tumors are a survival mechanism. Hypertension is a survival mechanism. Diabetes is a survival mechanism. Like, we don't like that, but our body is adapting to the circumstances that we're putting it in. If it didn't adapt, we would die. Could you imagine that our body didn't have this self-regulating capability? It would be like your car. If you put sugar in your gas tank, that's not going to happen more than once. But we could put sugar in our gas tank and our body will respond, and it's resilient, right? And it's kind of the gift and the curse, because it takes you 50, 40, 50, 60 years to destroy your brain. Could take you 30, 40, 50 years to destroy your heart, right? So we could be doing things wrong for a long period of time. And then when our body finally says, okay, I can't take this anymore, and it starts showing up as symptoms or starts showing up as dysfunction, we immediately vilify the very thing that has been keeping us alive this entire time.
You have a really cool background, chiropractor. We share that in common, but you got into the functional med side. Do you think the intellectual understanding of how the body works is what gave you the power to say, oh, it's all within me? Like, the wisdom is here the whole time? Because a lot of our clients and patients don't have that journey. So can you speak to the intellectual and then also coming to the emotional, spiritual?
In chiropractic college, we learn about a philosophy called innate intelligence. And it's basically the intelligence that governs everything we see around us, right? In nature, at least. And it was planted in me as a seed. The seeds didn't really sprout for me until I had my son. And just witnessing the magic of my wife 3D printing another human being inside of her body, the birth experience, and then holding this child, which, is auto-regulating itself right? Without any inputs. It's like a computer needs inputs. If I just turn on my computer, it does nothing, right? I've got to give it inputs and tell it what to do. However, this body is self-regulating, and it has all the wisdom of the entire universe wrapped up inside every single one of the 50 to 100 trillion cells. And that really turned me into a believer of innate wisdom and innate intelligence. And right around that time is when I started my functional medicine practice. And, I would say I'm still a chiropractor, through and through, because if we really study chiropractic philosophy isn't, simply manipulating or mobilizing and stabilizing tissue. It's how we eat, how we move, how we think, right? It's our environment. It's all of those things. And I look at chiropractic as a lifestyle, not as a procedure. And insurance and society has reduced chiropractic down to a procedure. So when people say I'm going to the chiropractor, that's an action step that they're taking, but I'm chiropracting every moment of my life.
How do you talk to your son about this biointelligence within him? I mean, how should we be talking to our children to set them up for, you are self-regulating, you can adapt to the world. And yes, we can change the environment, but it's really coming into that trust with the body and knowing that it comes from within us. How do you teach your son these things?
Your children don't listen to what you say. They observe what you do. The fastest way a human being learns is through mirroring, watching somebody else do something. And especially between the age of 0 and 7, 0 and 8 is when their worldview is developed. The way they communicate to themselves and others, what they eat, the way they behave. So it's not just speaking your truth, but more importantly, living your truth. And guess what? You benefit from that as a parent. Your child benefits from that. And that's what they pass down to the next generation. So you're actually creating multi-generational, health outcomes and legacy by living your best life now. My framework for the way I live my life is really simple. It makes decision-making really simple. And that is this: I want to live a life that my ancestors would be proud of because of all the crap that they had to go through for me to be born, right? And to live in this time. And I want to live a life that my future generations are grateful for. And so when I'm making a decision, that's the question I ask myself. 2 questions, right? Would my ancestors be proud of me right now for making this decision the way I'm going to make it? And would my future generations be grateful? And that makes being healthy super, super simple, because we're not just thinking about ourselves, but we're thinking about all the people that came before us to make this life possible, and all the lives that we will make possible that we are in many ways responsible for.
I want to take us into the nerve system, which I know you're very familiar with, and just ask you, what does the nerve system mean to you?
So there's, really there's 2 main components, and I'm going to keep it really simple for people to understand. And certainly there's people that are functional neurologists that can go a lot deeper into this. But from a superficial standpoint, I like to think of the nervous system as the master operator. It's kind of like the maestro that's looking after all of our biological processes at an unconscious level and at a conscious level. And so our nervous system is constantly learning, especially again, between the age of 0 and 8. It's learning from its environment. It's learning from other people's responses, right? So there's learned responses that we have. So if we see somebody freak out if they see a spider, then guess what? That gets impregnated into our nervous system that I'm supposed to do the same thing. So it creates some of our fears, it stores them, kind of deeply embeds them. And there's a part of our brain called the amygdala, which is kind of our master processing center, if you will. And this is where the inputs come in from all of our 5, or let's call it 6 senses. And then the amygdala has to determine, should I respond with fear and flight, or should I respond, or am I safe? And so when we feel safe, that creates a more parasympathetic response. When we feel scared, or we feel like we're in danger, and this is a protective mechanism, our body goes into a state of fight or flight. And so for most people, their fight or flight response actually comes from their lived experiences, their values, and their beliefs. So if somebody's nervous system is dysregulated, That's one of the first places we want to go, because two people could be in a very similar situation and one person's completely freaking out and the other person is totally calm, and has nothing to do with their physical body, right? But it has more to do with their software, right? So the hardware is just fine. It's the software that needs to be reprogrammed. And just like you can update the software on your computer, you can update the software in your mind. And some software is firmware, so it's a little bit harder to reprogram, but it can be reprogrammed depending on the type of interventions that somebody is willing to go through. So that could be plant medicines, it could be breath work, it could be a variety of different, healing modalities. It could be different types of therapies that people go through to really boil to the surface some of these beliefs and shatter them if they're not true, reprogram their values, right? And enable people to write a new story. There's a part of our nervous system and really our brain called the default mode network. And the default mode network is basically what causes consistent and constant rumination. So most people, as Joe Dispenza has very eloquently shared with us, 95% of the thoughts that we have are the same from one day to the next, which means that we're going to live the same life. Just like if you drove down the same road every day and took the same turns, you're going to end up in the same destination. Now, imagine waking up one day and all the roads disappeared, right? That's shutting off your default mode network. And we can do that through plant medicine. We can also do that through breath work, right? And different therapies can help us do that. So it's almost like opening up the book of your life to a whole new blank page where you get to rewrite that story. You get to erase the old stories and we get to write some new stories. Most of the things that happened to us at certain ages in our lives had nothing to do with us. What's interesting about children is they're born with no ego. If they see their own hand, they don't even know that that's their own hand. They don't even have that awareness. They don't even have a name when they're born. We give them that name and it takes them a year or two to even respond to it. So they have no ego. They're connected with everything. And then as we grow up and as our nervous system starts learning from our environment, it starts shaping the state of our nervous system. So many of us are 6-year-olds trapped in adult bodies and we respond the same way. So if you don't like, a way that your life is going right now, maybe it's your financial situation, maybe it's your relationship, maybe it's your career path, maybe it's how you respond to specific situations, don't try to fix the things outside of you, because those are the as is. Like that's just is what it is. You can't always change that. But what you can change is how you respond to a situation. And the way you change that is by reprogramming the subconscious. And there's different ways that you can go about doing that. I have a dear friend, Gabe Roberts. He's also a chiropractor. He does something called Holographic Manipulation Therapy. All stories and events in our lives are stored as holograms in the brain. And so he can take you to that point where you wrote that story and impregnated it into your nervous system that this is true, even though it wasn't, and help you rewrite that story. When I was young, just to kind of share a personal story, when I was young, my mom took me to India. And I'm on my mom's side of the family, I was the first grandchild. And so my grandparents were like over the moon, the next generation. Here's our patriarch of the next generation. It's very traditional for our Indian families to live in multi-generational homes. But my mom had moved to Canada, took me back to visit my grandparents, and they said, well, we would love to keep him. And of course, it was probably the hardest thing she ever had to do, right? Leaving a 6-month-old with your parents and going, flying across the ocean without cell phones and internet and FaceTime and, all that jazz. And so for me, I struggled with abandonment issues. And I never really understood why until I went back to my pre-verbal time in my life. And I had to unpack that with my grandparents and my mom, and even my wife helped me too, because, I still remember this when I used to work in an office. She would leave to go home and either pick up my son from school or go home and prepare a nice dinner for the family. And I would struggle with that. I would feel like she was abandoning me, even though she was not. She was, serving myself and my family and But the unconscious pattern was abandonment. And so it's easy for us to, perhaps identify these patterns if they're repeating over and over. What's hard is asking the right questions and getting into a state where we can boil those experiences to the surface, stare them in the face, and then create a new story or create a story that serves us. So I think when it comes to the nervous system, it's a very interesting and fascinating part of our body. It regulates so much of our physiology. And when we can get people to go from being in fight or freeze and get them into what we call a regulated state, or a parasympathetic state, or a dorsal or ventral vagal state, then we start experiencing the magic that our body truly is. Like, our body has this immense capacity to heal if you put it in the right state. But if you keep it in the wrong state, right, it's going to create a predictable response every single time without fail until it can't do that anymore. So for some people, what that might look like, if they're wondering, am I in fight or flight, or am I dysregulated? That's going to look like, hypertension, poor digestion, difficulty with sleep, waking up in the middle of the night and having a hard time going to bed. For some people, it could cause hormonal weight gain, right? Especially around the midsection. It could also cause immune system dysregulation. It could cause diabetes, insulin resistance, and high blood sugar. Now, all of these responses are perfectly predictable and perfectly normal. But what isn't normal is to stay in that state. Because if a lion was chasing me, I want to increase my blood pressure. I want to increase my heart rate. I don't want to fall asleep. I don't want to digest. I don't want to detox. My white blood cells aren't going to save me. So we do certain things in those states that increase our chances of survival, but they're meant to be very short-lived. They're not meant to be activated all the time. In fact, a good example is Mother Nature, right? When we watch animal documentaries, if they were to follow a lion for a week, it would be the most boring documentary of all time, right? They don't eat very often. They don't do big chases very often. They're not hunting, 3-4 times a day, because they're mostly in rest and digest. They're mostly in a parasympathetic state. And that's why they don't get ulcers. That's why they don't get cancer. That's why they don't get, they don't have sleep issues, because they're living in a very congruent way. And, what's causing most of the illnesses today is living in incongruence. It's not the body doing anything wrong. Like, it's predictable. When somebody comes to me and says, I can't sleep, my digestion sucks, I'm constipated, I can't sleep at night, my blood pressure is high, my blood sugar is all over the place. I'm like, congratulations, your body's working. It's responding exactly as it should to the inputs that you're giving it. Now, if you were to say, I have a really high stress life, right, and, and didn't have any of those other complaints, then I might be wondering, okay, your nervous system isn't responding properly, because there comes a point when we go into freeze and the nervous system is not responding correctly. So we go from fight or flight, and when that goes unchecked, we can't keep running forever. So our body goes into a state of freeze. That's when we start feeling hopeless. We start feeling trapped. We might even feel suicidal. We start feeling worthless, right? Like the chemistry in our body and our brain completely changes when we go into a freeze or fawn type of state.
I want to go back to what you said, because I'm still having the visual, and I love how you said it. If we're driving down the same road, we're just pattern conditioning the same thing. And then you said there's a way we can work with the mind. We can decondition the pattern so that there are no more roads. Take me into, and we'll get into breath work, maybe some plant medicine as well. But how do you teach your clients how to do that?
Yeah, it's actually the fastest way I've found is through breath work. And so one of the things that I've been learning over the last few years, and I just want to say this, if it's not obvious or clear, is that I am not an expert. I'm forever a student. And so, and I believe the true master is forever a student. So I'm in my mastering phase. So I'm just constantly learning new things and then trying to share them based on my observations, understanding of the science. And of course, I don't know everything. However, I'll share what I feel, might be helpful for people. So a few years ago, I went through a Wim Hof breathwork experience. And it was really cool because it showed me how my breath, which I refer to as the steering wheel of the nervous system, how I could use my breath to manipulate my physiology in a very predictable way. And so after that experience, I was able to hold my breath for about 3.5 minutes, which I didn't even know was possible. After never even trying, but just by doing this breathing exercise once, I was able to do that. And then after that, we went into a cold plunge, and we were in Toronto in the middle of February, and outside in our swim trunks, and this little kiddie pool was filled with ice, and we had to get in there for max 90 seconds, and then they didn't give us towels. We had to dry ourselves off using our breath and using our bodies to generate heat to dry ourselves off. So we're out there, we're like in the freezing cold in February. We just came out of this cold, plunge, and now there's no towels, right? And that was done intentionally just to show us what we're capable of. After that, I had an experience using plant medicine, and I did some psilocybin. And psilocybin, for those of you who don't know, are also referred to as magic mushrooms. There are a variety of different strains. My preferred strain is called Golden Teacher. And it kind of gives you some really cool lessons and helps you unpack whatever you're dealing with at the time, and even past stuff that you have going on. And that was a very profound experience for me. And then my same mentor that took me through that experience took me through a breathwork experience about 1.5 years later. And through that breathwork experience, I actually had an even more profound boundary dissolving, experience for myself. And I did that all with my breath. And so what I've learned is that we have 3 key systems that are involved here. One is our lungs. So if people don't know this, Chinese medicine has talked about this for thousands of years. We store our grief in our lungs. We store our trauma in our diaphragm and in our myofascial system. So our myofascial system is like, almost like this cobweb-like structure that connects the nucleus of every cell in our body together simultaneously through a hydrostatic system, which means it maintains constant pressure. So if you were to get a blow to the arm, for example, that energy is distributed throughout the entire myofascial system. So it maintains constant pressure and force distribution. Now you're going to feel it more here, but the force distributes throughout the entire body. It absorbs, your whole body absorbs, that whole system absorbs that shock. What happens when we experience something traumatic is we go through a process called dissociation. If we experience something super traumatic that our body and our nervous system can't handle, it just buries it into the myofascial system. And so the main muscle that, and this makes total sense, the diaphragm sits in the middle. The diaphragm also is referred to as the horizon. So it separates the heart and the lungs with the other visceral organs below it. The diaphragm is the only muscle that we can control voluntarily that works for us 24/7. So in case you haven't given your diaphragm some love lately, make sure you do, because you've been breathing 23,000 times a day. And it's that one muscle that we can voluntarily control. So I can actively control my breath. Now, what's interesting about the diaphragm is as it moves up and down 23,000 times, it pumps your lymphatic system, which is your cellular waste. Some of the biggest lymph nodes in our body are underneath our diaphragm. And the diaphragm is also referred to as the second heart. So it, as it moves up and down, it's assisting the heart in creating pressure. When we breathe in and out, our lungs expand and contract, compressing the heart, assisting it in moving blood through the body. And the other thing the diaphragm does is it's basically, imagine the middle of a spider web where the spider hangs out. And if something causes the web to shake, if a fly flies into the spider web, the fly's force is distributed equally throughout the entire web. So no matter where the spider is on the web, it senses something is trapped in the web, and then it goes and finds it and then eats it, or the fly escapes. So our myofascial system, the center of that myofascial system is the diaphragm. And so when we think about this for a minute, whenever we experience something traumatic, what do? We hold our breath. When we are upset, what do? We cry. Right? Crying is breath work. Crying is actually one of the fastest ways to regulate the nervous system. That's why we should never stop a baby from crying.
Tell me more about that. Crying is one of the fastest ways to regulate the nerve system.
If our grief is stored in our lungs, as we cry, we're releasing that. And when we tell a child to stop crying, what happens? In order to stop crying, you have to stop breathing. And in order to stop breathing, you have to stop moving your diaphragm. So now the diaphragm develops trigger points. It becomes dysfunctional. And if that pattern keeps repeating itself, it becomes more and more dysfunctional. And then as we develop these trigger points, the diaphragm, just like any other muscle, doesn't move through its full range of motion. And so now our breath becomes short and shallow and somewhat restrictive. And short, shallow breathing signals to our nervous system that we're in fight or flight. So many people, because of their traumas or the lack of the ability to release these traumas, they get buried down. They get buried down into the myofascial system. The diaphragm starts to develop trigger points. Their breath becomes short and shallow. And then they're anxious and nervous and they have hypertension and all these things, and they don't know why. They're eating all the right foods, they're exercising, they're going to bed on time. But the main input to the nervous system, the steering wheel of the nervous system, is the breath. So when I change the way somebody breathes, I change the state of their nervous system. So if they're breathing correctly like a child would, and they have full range of motion in their diaphragm, then they're going to have a normal breath, a calm, normal breath. But if I have a child that's, another example is, imagine somebody who's going to hit you. What's the first muscle you clench? It's your diaphragm, because that's the force distribution muscle. It's going to distribute that force throughout the entire body. And so when we tell people to stop crying, we force them to bury their emotions into the myofascial system, which later pops up as could be any variety of things. And I'll share a quick story with you. So I was speaking to a group of dentists, and one of the exercises I had them do in a ceremony I was leading them through was a diaphragmatic release. And so it's really simple. I'm sure you've done this with your clients, where we just kind of get under their rib cage and, hook our fingers under there and palpate under the rib cage and see if there's any trigger points that are there. And so he found this like gnarly trigger point under his right rib cage. And so everyone's doing the exercise, and then all of a sudden he bursts out into tears. And so, we let him process. Like, we never wanted to stop crying, because what happened, the instinct for an adult when they start crying is to what? Stop crying. And so we let him release. And then when he was ready, we had him share. And I said, his name's Mike. I said, Mike, do you care to share? And he's like, when I was young, I used to get bullied. And so I would walk down the hallway in school, and I never knew if I was going to get punched in the stomach or not. So what I would do is I would hold my breath and hold my stomach really rigid, which means you're keeping your diaphragm in that position. And so that created all these trigger points in his diaphragm. And so in that one moment of just releasing that trigger point, he was able to release the emotion that was associated with it. It's kind of like this default mode network that we're talking about is, in order for him to write a new story, he had to get rid of the old stories. There's only so much room on the hard drive. I mean, our hard drive in our body, like our myofascial system, is our emotional hard drive. It's huge. It has basically unlimited storage capacity. And so the breath is the steering wheel of the nervous system. And just like if you let go of your steering wheel in your car, and let's say it's your car not, just skews right because the alignment is off. That's somebody who's had trauma, their alignment is off. Now, I could take my hands, put both my hands or one hand on the steering wheel and make that car go straight. And that's when I'm actively controlling my breath. So I could breathe in a way that soothes my nervous system. But as soon as I let go of the wheel and I start driving or breathing unconsciously, it's going to go back to its default shift towards the right or shift towards sympathetic dominance. So yes, it's important to have conscious control over our breath, but it's also important for us to understand that what are the unconscious factors that are changing the way we breathe or regulating the way we breathe, which then determines the state of our nervous system at its default setting.
I mean, there's a paradox to this too, because there's control, setting up the structure and awareness of your breath and creating a rhythm to change the state. But then there's also this ability to surrender and just be with wherever the breath wants to teach you where you are. So how do you work with this with clients? If I wanted to start a breath practice, what is the one breath practice you would recommend?
Yeah, the easiest one I would recommend for people, maybe the hardest for some, but easy to do, is mouth taping. So 66% of people breathe with their mouth open while they sleep. And when we breathe through our mouth, it signals to our body we're in fight or flight. So a really simple example, if I were to tell you to, and intuitively, I think we know this, right? If I were to tell you to meditate, you wouldn't be breathing like, right? You would have your mouth closed, tongue would probably be at the roof of your mouth. You'd be inhaling and exhaling through your nose, and intuitively that makes sense. Now, if you were sprinting, how would you be breathing?
Probably through my mouth.
Through your mouth, tongue hanging out of your mouth, right? Breathing in and out as fast as you can. And that makes sense because every time you breathe in and out rapidly and move your diaphragm up and down and expand and contract your lungs, that helps increase blood pressure, because we need more blood pressure to get blood to our fingertips and our toes and arms and legs so we could run away from whatever's chasing us. So you'd want to be breathing that way. But if sleeping is the most healing thing that we do, and somebody's breath is dysfunctional while they're sleeping, then for 6 to 8 to 10 hours a day, depending on what their schedule is like, their nervous system is dysregulated and tilting towards more of a fight or flight state. So they're never really healing and repairing. And this is, specifically true for people who feel more tired than when they went to bed. When we breathe through our mouth, again, 50% of the population breathes through their mouth during the day, 66% at night. So we're speaking to half to 2/3 of the audience here. And if you don't, that's awesome. I don't. However, I do feel like mouth tape is a very, very affordable insurance policy. It changes the structure of your face. It protects your teeth. The number one cause of cavities is mouth breathing. It improves your immune health. Our immune system starts in our nose. Our lung microbiome is also influenced by the way we breathe. So our nose purifies the air while we're breathing through it versus our mouth actually makes it dirtier. Our mouth is the dirtiest part of our body. So we don't want to be breathing through it as much as we can help it. So I think mouth taping is one really quick, easy way for people to, inexpensive too. You can buy a roll of 3M micropore tape on Amazon. You can get 12 rolls of tape for $10. So it's like literally the cheapest intervention that you could possibly do. And you just put the tape on your mouth vertically like this. You don't have to seal your mouth. That'll keep your tongue at the roof of your mouth. That soothes your nervous system. This is why children use pacifiers or suck on their thumb, because they hit this magic button in the roof of their mouth just behind their front 2 teeth that soothes their nervous system. Activates a mudra, which is kind of an energy circuit. And it also helps them slow down their breath. When we breathe through our nose, it pressurizes the air, temperature regulates the air, moisture regulates the air, cleanses the air. So we actually get more out of each breath when we breathe through our nose versus breathing through our mouth. The next thing when it comes to breath is there's different breathing practices. So an example I can share with you is, just like there's an app for everything, there's a breath for everything. So there's a way you breathe in order to elicit a specific response. So most people I know, they want to be in a calm, collected state. And so there's a breath for that. It's called coherence breathing. So coherence breathing is where you breathe in for 6 seconds and out for 6 seconds. Sounds long, and it can feel long. In fact, when you breathe this way, you increase oxygenation of the brain by 20%. It puts you in a more parasympathetic state. It increases blood flow to the parts of your brain that make you better at problem solving and make you more creative. So that coherence breathing is really simple: 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out, tongue at the roof of the mouth, breathing in and out through the nose. Now the question becomes, how do I remember that, right? How do I know how to breathe, or how do I remind myself throughout the day, how to breathe? And so I'm sure you know BJ Fogg. You probably met him. So BJ Fogg is a Stanford professor who wrote the book Tiny Habits. And So breath is a tiny habit, which creates a big result. And so his formula is BMAP. So behavior equals MAP. Motivation, ability, and prompt. So if we're motivated to change our health outcomes, change the state of our nervous system, change the state of our lives, then breath is an access point for that. Next is ability, right? Do we have the ability to change the way we're breathing? Of course we do. And then the third thing is a prompt. So that's the key, is the prompt. So instead of creating more work for yourself or new work for yourself, find something that you do often throughout the day, and then make that your anchor for your breath. So for some people, if I ask somebody what's something you do often throughout the day, it might be, I check my phone, 100 times a day, or I check my email, or I'm driving and I'm in the car and I get to red lights. But that can be your anchor to bring you back to your breath. And it literally takes like a split second, and you're just checking in. Am I breathing in a way that is enhancing the experience that I'm having right now? So if I'm exercising, I'm going to breathe differently. If I'm meditating, I'm going to breathe a certain way. If somebody's having an asthma attack, there's a way to recover from that. If somebody wants to have more energy, there's a breathing pattern for that to increase their heart rate and blood pressure and activate their sympathetic system. So we call that yogic coffee, where you could do rapid breathing patterns that will help increase adrenaline. So if you don't want to drink coffee in the morning or in the afternoon and you need more energy to get through the day, then you can change the way you breathe to activate certain parts of you. Some people might want to feel calm, right? Maybe they've had a stressful day or a stressful session with a client. You might encounter this where you're taking on a lot of people's energy. And so instead of, taking it on, we can release it. And the way you do that is through something called a physiologic sigh, where you exaggerate the sigh. So you would take a, multi-stage breath into the belly, into the chest, into the throat, hold for a few seconds. I like to encourage people to squeeze their pelvic floor. And then we release drop the tongue, release with an audible sigh. What we're doing is we're tapping into what the nervous system already does. So if you feel a sense of relief, you sigh without even realizing you're doing it. When you find something funny, you laugh. Try laughing without breathing. Right? It's impossible. So breathing is incorporated into so many of our emotions. And so if you can become a breath detective, you can actually see the state of somebody's nervous system based on how they're breathing, right? As clinicians, I think this is such a powerful gift for us to pay attention. Even if you ask them a question, pay attention to how their breath changes, because that's going to tell you how their nervous system is responding to the question, not their intellectual system. Sometimes what people say and what they feel are two different things. See, the breath doesn't lie. So, because it's a window into the nervous system. So paying attention to that, even in your partner, right? I could tell if my wife wants to have a conversation about a certain topic or not based on when I pose the question, what her response is like. So you pay attention. It's subtle, but I can tell if she sighs, like I already know she doesn't want to talk about this, because she's trying to self-soothe herself because she felt that spike in her stress and her body said, okay, you need to chill. But if she's excited to talk about it, she's going to take a breath in, because what excites our nervous system is breathing in. What relaxes our nervous system is breathing out. So paying attention to how somebody's breathing signature changes when you're having certain types of conversations or asking them certain questions can clue you into what their body is telling you versus what their mouth is telling you.
What about the breath holds? You talked about you were able to hold it for 3 minutes. I mean, most people listening to that is like, that's unimaginable. So what are the breath holds doing for the body? And is it different if you're holding at the top of the inhale versus the exhale?
What's interesting about our breath physiology is that when we do breath holds, we increase the concentration of CO2. Now, a breath hold is much easier when we inhale, because it takes, and hold on the inhale, because it takes longer for that CO2 concentration to increase. When we hold our breath and we increase CO2 levels, that actually increases oxygenation of our tissues. So it's something called the Bohr effect, which seems counterproductive, or counterintuitive rather. But when we increase CO2, which is what creates the urge for us to breathe. So our urge to breathe doesn't come from needing more oxygen. It comes from wanting to release the CO2 that's trapped in our lungs. And that's what creates that anxiety to breathe again. And so when we do breath holds, we're changing the pH of the body, thereby increasing CO2 levels, thereby increasing oxygenation of our tissues. And that's like a beautiful thing, right? If we think about that, it sounds kind of weird and counterintuitive, but it's beautiful because imagine somebody stops breathing. Imagine for whatever reason they're injured or something happens and they're not breathing. Each breath that we take has 5 additional breaths in it, because with every breath we take, we only absorb about 20% of the oxygen. So if someone were to stop breathing, as CO2 levels would increase, the pH in the blood changes, and now the body starts dumping more of the oxygen at the tissue level. So a lot of it, doing breath holds is getting into that state where you've altered the pH of the blood so that you're not feeling deprived, and then building tolerance to CO2. So CO2 tolerance training is something that we have our clients do, because the more tolerant you are to CO2, the more you can actually get oxygen to the tissue. So it's quite amazing. Like even when we do breath holds in our breathing practices that we teach our clients and the experiences that we take them through, the first round, they might be able to hold it for, 45 seconds. And then the 5th round of breathing that we go through, they're like, they forgot that they even needed to breathe anymore. They're just like in this beautiful state where they can really enjoy the euphoria that they're feeling and not even have the urgency or the urge to breathe, because they've just become so much more tolerant to the CO2 and their body is being oxygenated. In fact, the body is more oxygenated the less we breathe. And this is why when people, Patrick McEwen describes this as air hunger. So that 6-second in, 6-second out breathing pattern is going to make people feel hungry for air. And that's how you know it's working.
Yeah, I love that you're saying that, because sometimes in meditations, it's when you're not really breathing that you are plugging into that euphoric state.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a lot of people, breathwork is becoming very trendy right now. I don't know if it's because you made it trendy, but a lot of people are doing the mechanics of it, and they're also trying just to be perfect about it. But there's something that happens at the end of breathwork where you've done all the work. Now you can just bathe in what you've done and then feel where that breath is taking you. So it's very counterintuitive that like the less you breathe, the more you'll feel.
When somebody does breath work, when they do like elemental rhythm, or if they do, some Wim Hof, and there's a variety, whatever we call it, when they do somatic breath work essentially means we're using the breath to change the body. With somatic breath work, I equate it to shaking a tree. So imagine you have a fruit tree, and if you were to shake that tree for an hour, all the fruit that's ready to fall is going to fall. All the dead branches, all the dying leaves, they're all going to fall to the ground and present themselves to you. And so this is where our past traumas might present themselves to us. This is where some of our nonverbal traumas might present themselves to us. And you just put a tarp, like putting a tarp underneath the tree, and then you just collect it all and you're like, okay, I don't need this anymore. I'll share a quick story just to drive this home. So I was facilitating a breath work for a group of doctors. And during one of the sessions, one of the people who was doing it, her arm started shaking, just her right arm. So I knew it wasn't systemic, because if it was both arms and legs, then we're leaning into something systemic. And she was just like bawling her eyes out. And so afterwards I asked her, I said, Betsy, do you care to share? And essentially many years ago, she was in a car accident. She's a surgeon. She was in a car accident and she lost the ability to use her right hand. And that was her, dominant arm. And so she had to quit doing surgery. But what she realized in the breathing and in the breath work was that she didn't want to do surgery anyways. And in fact, she was blaming her arm, and she was using that arm and that accident as a scapegoat to stop doing something that she didn't want to do in the first place. So the universe kind of sent her a message with the accident that, hey, you need to do something different with your life. And she did, she pivoted, but she always kept holding on to that story with her arm. And so her arm was like shaking like crazy, telling her, listen, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm here. I've been here all along. But it's the story that you've been telling yourself and me that has kept me dormant and inactive and, docile, so to speak. And so she was able to rewrite that story, shaking that tree, getting rid of the stories that aren't serving us through the breath is one of the most powerful things that we can do. And I know we touched on plant medicine, so I just want to close that loop. So the way I look at it is that plant medicine is like taking the helicopter to the top of the mountain, and breath work is like taking the stairs, doing the work. So it is work. And what's beautiful about it is you're in control of it, right? With plant medicine, the medicine's in control of it. Whereas with your breath, you're in control of it.
Breathwork is this beautiful foundation. It literally is how we create this awareness of our body. A lot of people can't connect to their body, but they can connect to their breath. The inhale, the exhale, they can feel that. They can feel the holds. So I think it allows people to get more embodied if they can't connect to like this.
Our myofascial system connects the cell nucleus of every cell to one another, except our red blood cells, which don't have, cell nucleus. So every cell in your body is simultaneously connected through this internal web-like structure. And so what controls that web, right? The center of that web is the breath. So if you control your breath, you don't have to worry about all the other parts. It automatically, that energy gets transferred to every part of you. And it makes sense that it's the diaphragm right in the middle. It wouldn't make as much sense if our diaphragm was in our head, but it's right here, right in the middle, just like the middle of that spider web. So I look at breath as the lead domino, because if you regulate your breath, you're regulating your cardiovascular function, you're regulating your lymphatic function, you're regulating your nervous system, you're regulating your emotional database, which is your myofascial system. You're pumping your internal organs to move the lymph, but also to create motility and function in those organs. You're regulating your vagal tone. So there's like so many things that happen when you just learn how to breathe correctly by default, right? And if I was an intelligent designer, that's exactly what I would do. I would take something that my creation does every single day to survive and function. I would make it automatic. I would make it controllable. And I would ensure that that one thing, again, something embarrassingly simple in a sophisticated system, does a lot of things. And so we don't have to fix all of these things separately. That would not be sophisticated to treat all of these different problems individually. What would be sophisticated is a simple solution, which is the breath. I mean, what could be simpler than teaching people how to breathe? It's the first thing they did when they were born, right? It's the first thing that we look for. They're crying, right? And that's why babies cry when they're born, to regulate their nervous system. And if you're lucky enough to experience somebody's final breath, which I was able to do with my grandmother, then it's one of the most beautiful experiences that you'll ever have. So I got to experience my son's first breath. I got to experience my grandmother's final breath. And, there's just so much to it, right? There's a physical component, there's an emotional component, there's a spiritual component. And it's something that once I went down this rabbit hole, I just couldn't look back. And it just ties into so much of the work you do, so much of the work that we do with our clients. And it's made such a profound shift for them. And once they understand it and see it, they can't unsee it. And I like to say the answers are right under our noses.
It sounds like the doctor is in the breath for you.
Mm.
Is there one last thing you want to say that hasn't been said, if it was to help someone embody more of this natural doctor within, this innate intelligence within?
I think it's high time, it's long overdue, that people start believing in themselves, where they start honoring their bodies. And we never want to delegate that responsibility to somebody else. And so I feel like, what's missing right now in healthcare is doctors aren't doctors, they're indoctrinated. And it's important that we, as clinicians, go back to our roots, live up to our namesakes, which is education, which is teaching. And the question is, what are we going to teach? We don't want to teach people what drugs to take. We want to teach them how to become their own pharmacy. Your breath is a pharmacy. Your body is a surgeon. Your environment is your nurse. And if we can learn to live in congruence with our physiology and honor our bodies, then an amazing life awaits. And here's the thing that's really cool. 90% of your cells replace themselves in 6 months. So 90% of your cells are renewed in a 6-month period. The oldest cell in your body is about 7 years old. So you are constantly being reborn. Just like, as I said earlier, buying you a new car doesn't make you a better driver. Teaching you how to drive makes you a better driver. And how beautiful would it be if we got a new car every 6 months and we became better drivers every 6 months? Imagine how amazingly we could take care of that vehicle. And our bodies are the same way. They're very forgiving, they're very resilient, and we never want to take that for granted.
Thank you so much, Sachin. Where can people find you?
Sure. So if they want the rawest, unfiltered version of me, they can follow me on Facebook. It's Sachin Patel DC. That's my personal page. They can also, if they're interested in learning more about breathing and breath, they can go to breathworkwithsachin.com. It's all one word. And if they want to learn more about how we work with clients, if they're interested, we have a metabolic program. And that program is also available. They can go to mymetabolicreset.ca if they're looking for metabolic transformation.
Which is a fantastic program. I just have to echo. It's changed our clients and my family's life. So
amazing.
Thank you for that program. Everyone, you should definitely check it out. All right, Sachin, thank you so much for being with us.
It is my absolute honor. Thank you.
If you like this episode, share it with a friend. For more conversations filled with awe and wonder, be sure to subscribe to the Vitalist podcasts. Till next time.